Last week, we spoke of how the characters of a novel, just like story and plot, are devices that carry us towards the subjects, the pictures, the moments we wish to write about. Drawing on the example of Virginia Woolf's Orlando, we noted that as much as a novel's landscape, its characters too are shaped by language and by certain stylistic choices. If our aim is to write a unique, innovative work of fiction, we will find it more beneficial to focus our creativity and imagination on inventing a new language, a new style, rather than on crafting out characters, rather than being busy. Is my character right? Is my character this? Is my character taking me and making me make the novel work? Of course, again, I repeat, that doesn't mean the character is not important, but the way the novel works is that you don't have the character at first, you have other things. The language and style of a novel come into existence before its characters do. Comparing a novel by Zola to a novel by Garcia Marquez will make this truth apparent, but it will also reveal how enigmatic the subject of fictional characters can be. Like a novel story, its protagonists are imaginary, fictional creations, and literature is the most effective medium through which humanity has expressed its views on the subject of character. The best way to summarize how the literary character has evolved through history is to use a mathematical equation, as Borges or Paul Valéry might have done. So, up until the Renaissance, our understanding of a fictional character, let's say X, could be more or less distilled, summed up into equation. X equals A. Mary is stingy. Captain Ahab is passionate. No more than that about character, where A stands for stingy, jealous, etc. Whenever Homer mentioned a particular character, he would summarize all of their traits as lists of adjectives. I confess, in my childhood, in a very serious way, I self-imposed to myself to read Homer, but it was always a list of adjectives about characters. Before the advent of modern literature, the role of the literary text was to test a character's trait, such as bravery, kindness, wickedness, stinginess, whatever, within the conditions set by a particular story or a drama. This pre-modern understanding of character, and in fact, human being, when we discuss about character, don't forget that we are discussing about our understanding of human being. Literature goes beyond texts. It goes right into our minds, our understanding of humanity. These literary constructs help us to think, give us almost Kantian categories to understand what is life, what is human beings alike. This pre-modern understanding of character and of the human being, similar to what is known in the social science today as essentialism, can be easily identified in the work of 17th century Ottoman travel writer Evliya Çelebi. I thought maybe I'll give you an example from Turkish literature too, which is more or less the same in medieval European literature. Evliya Çelebi would use similar language in describing the atmosphere, the climate, the water quality, the geographical characteristics of a particular Ottoman town. He was a travel writer, as he would in declaring certain characters to be cheerful or amusing or friendly or warm. This approach to human character is not so different from what we today in our everyday lives, when we come out with an extravagant generalizations about the French idea of romance, or how Americans are always optimistic, so forth and so on. That said, we might still reasonably assume that nations can possess certain defining characteristics, a conceivable set of essentialist traits. We might continue, logically conclude that the character of a people living in a cold, mountainous country won't perhaps be the same as the national character of a people from a hot country living in a desert by the sea. We might harbor similarly reasonable views on the character of an individual or of a literary protagonist. F. Scott Fitzgerald's hero Gatsby, after we know the novel Great Gatsby, endures poverty and destitution in his youth, and once he becomes rich, he exhibits, illustrates certain distinct behaviors and develops a particular kind of personality. Of course, we don't just unquestioningly accept the essentialist generalization of these personality traits, but we can see for ourselves the transformation, the evolution of Gatsby's personality. But then again, The Great Gatsby is a novel born of the modern understanding of literature, not a pre-modern creature. Let's continue to ponder for a little while this question of the fictional character. This is a topic of fundamental importance, not only to the art of the novel, but to the way literature and human beings conceptualize the notion of the other, and thus how they approach all of the humanities. I mean, humanities, what we call sciences of humanities. Moreover, the ambiguity of the notion of the character happens to be one of the fundamental sources of creativity within a novel. Among the most brilliant literary creations to issue from the pre-modern essentialist understanding of the fictional character is Sophocles' Oedipus Rex. Oedipus is a good man, honest, strong-willed, well-meaning, and particularly careful to avoid wrongdoing, though these are precisely the traits that lead him into sin and turn him into someone wicked. Rather than exploring the nuances of Oedipus' personality, the play shows us how it is stretched out and tested by events. That is what makes the story of a tragedy. From the beginning right through the end of the play, Oedipus' personality remains unchanged. We could say the same of Molière's The Miser, even though we are accustomed to thinking of Molière as a modern or a Renaissance author. I would argue that this too is a character with essentialist traits which remain unchanged right through the end of the play. Now, here is a very important turning point in history of literature to me, to my sort of a Borgesian capsule, history of literature in a capsule. It was Shakespeare who brought about the first great transformation in our understanding of the modern human character and the modern literary character, and by extension, the modern understanding of human being. With Shakespeare, we find a new equation to define the fictional character. Now, this X equals A, B, C, D. If I were, I would have written this on the classroom. Macbeth is A, brave, B, daring, C, noble, and he is E, cowardly, F, indecisive, and F, and immoral, so forth and so on. Now we have a character is not A equals B, X equals A, but many, many, many things. This is a big invention which I ascribe to Shakespeare. The fictional character, and therefore the human being in general, is no longer seen to have a distinctive personality that we can immediately grasp and express in essentialist terms like geography. This town is cold, this town is humid, this town is this town is that. It's more complex now. Human beings, we understand, is more complex. The function of the literary text is no longer to praise the protagonist's positive characteristics or denounce their negative traits, but to observe how their personality interacts with the novel's landscape. That landscape, too, begins to change along with its characters. The text reveals the protagonist's, the character's autonomy and inner contradictions and the surprising ways in which this affects their actions, words, and thoughts. The purpose of the text is not to judge the character, but to display their full complexity. This is now, we are entering modernity. The protagonist has now embraced nearly all of the traits and adjectives Homer spoke of. He or she is at once everything and nothing. It's not just the protagonist's behavior that can be contradictory, but their words, their state of mind, and their fundamental character traits too. With Shakespeare's approach to the fictional character, humanity came to accept that people can have a contradictory character traits, not just in literature, but in real life too. But don't get me wrong, that they were going to a Shakespeare play and getting out of all informed about this? No, that didn't happen. I see Shakespeare from our point of view today, and writing history of a nation or history of literature is something like that. No one sees history as it unfolds, but we see it today, or we invent the history of literature according to our norms today. In literature, in modern literary forms, eventually, including the novel too, a significant part of the story soon come to be devoted to analyzing and understanding the character's traits and how they affect the reader. We began to read literary texts not just out of curiosity about Odysseus or some other hero's adventures, but also to find out more about the indecisions and other personality traits that characterize the likes of Hamlet and his fellow modern literary protagonists. Reading a literary text went from being a matter of following a character's adventures in a fictional realm to one of exploring the character's spiritual universe. This is how modern literature starts, modern novel especially. As book lovers slowly begin to realize, the character didn't even need to leave home for this to be possible. This, in turn, paved the way for stories and novels with urban settings. Taking Shakespeare's understanding of the multifaceted and contradictory character one step forward, now my second hero, Dostoevsky, showed that it was possible for characters to wholeheartedly say and do things in total conflict with what they stood for and believed. By now, we had shifted from what I would call the essentialist character, possessing a powerful essence and a sense of coherence, to a more elusive, contradictory, ambiguous figure with no single defining center or essence. Now, the protagonist's personality had become the main topic, not his adventures. We do not read the brothers Karamazov in order to solve the mystery of which of the Karamazov sons killed the father, but rather to fall under the spell of each of the siblings' clear and distinct personalities. This is exaggerated. Of course, we also read to understand who killed his father. But there is something much more behind that makes the detective story marginal. While we can always predict what Molière's misère will do in the next scene, probably find some new way of being miserly, we can never foresee what Dostoevsky's characters will get up to. There is a famous, now this is, I'll tell something contradictory. There is a famous anecdote based on something Tolstoy allegedly said about crime and punishment. You know, we always ask this, Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, they lived in the same time and never met and never commented about each other. Or Dostoevsky wrote about Anna Karenina, and Tolstoy said things that other people wrote down. That's so. Supposedly, Tolstoy said about crime and punishment, which contradicts what I've just said, shortly after starting the book Crime and Punishment. Now he is reading Tolstoy, reading Dostoevsky. Tolstoy said, I guess, reportedly guessed how the novel would end and set it to set aside. In fact, Tolstoy's novel Resurrection, which is not a very popular Tolstoy novel, is a rewriting of Crime and Punishment. Let's take a moment here to note how all writers who brought out a fresh and modern approach to the question of the fictional character were dramatic writers, and from there on go on to describe how Dostoevsky created his modern character, the underground man, from notes from the underground, in reaction to a political and cultural debate on the question of the human character. Here, I suggest this I wrote. There is an article in my other colors I wrote about the whole thing, but I am summing it up here. In the early 1860s, Russian intellectuals were busy discussing the question of determinism. Figures like Chernyshevsky had eagerly embraced the notions of positivism, rationalism, and determinism coming on from the West, and sought to rapidly disseminate these ideas through Russia, adapting a knowing, patronizing manner that enraged the nationalist Dostoevsky. Dostoevsky, who harbored anti-Western sentiments, set out to prove to the Westernizers that human beings were not logical creatures who always acted in their own best interest by creating his underground man, a brand new hero who maintained that 2 + 2 did not equal to 4, seemed determined to get himself beaten up and acted in various self-destructive ways. Maybe I'll repeat. Chernyshevsky was saying, hey, in West there is rationalism, and also the idea that human beings are rational and they do everything for their interests. And Dostoevsky was angry to West, and he decided to invent a character who would act opposite way, who says 2 × 2 is not 4, and who wanted to be beaten, and who did everything that will prove to us that he is not rational, also he is not helping his best interests. And it was an invention. Like Voltaire's Candide and Albert Camus' The Stranger, the underground man is a novel based on an idea. The kind of Faulkner, the kind of idea, remember the first week I talked about Faulkner saying a novel is a picture, idea, a memory. But Dostoevsky's imagination, what Bakhtin called the dialogic imagination, takes the book beyond the realm of the one-track novel of ideas. Dostoevsky rescues his underground man who lives alone and whose endlessly expansive mind points towards a deeper universe, that is, from what Bakhtin identifies as Western philosophy's monologic tradition and its world of endless definitions at the expense of individual freedom, placing him, his modern man, Dostoevsky, instead within a completely different polyphonic universe. Bakhtin's heroes were Dostoevsky and Rabelais. This is the same place where we understand that discovering a character's personality also means discovering a whole world, one where the author, the character, and the reader are all set free. But let's not forget about the paradoxe of the novelist, the title of my lectures. Dostoevsky's underground man wasn't just a product of what Faulkner would have called an idea. He was also inspired by a vision. I mean, Dostoevsky was inspired by a vision, a picture of an angry man doggedly arguing that 2 plus 2 does not equal to 4. There's a problem with the... What did I do? Is it my problem? There is an uprising in the classroom. Is everything okay? Shall I continue? Yes, okay. But I'm reading the last paragraph again. But let us not forget about the paradox of the novelist. Dostoevsky's underground man wasn't just a product of what Faulkner would have called an idea. He was also inspired. Dostoevsky was inspired by a vision, a picture of an angry man doggedly arguing in a very funny way, actually, that 2 plus 2 does not equal to 4. If character is everything, let us nevertheless remember, as we've noted in previous lectures, that fictional characters are born of what I call the novel's landscape, and at the same time are a device that we have invented to lead us to landscape, that is to say, to the leaves of the novel's tree. All the things that I've been saying in the last 4 weeks. This is the form of the paradox of the novelist takes when we consider the question of fictional characters. A novel doesn't begin when we've come up with its protagonists. It begins when we have taken the experiences we want to describe and the colorful sweep of our imagination and use them to compose the first few leaves. As we start to add to those initial leaves, leaf by leaf, relying on an idea, on stories, on plot to carry us forward, we eventually discover the character. Forming a fully realized mental image of the character as soon as possible is, of course, very important in enabling the author to write their novel, and in fact, it's not easy to do. Please trust me, I'm doing it for the last 50 years. But this is not because the character will somehow take control of events, as E.M. Forster said, choosing the story, the plot, and the language that will move the novel forward, though, as we have said before, this is a very common misconception. Being able to visualize the protagonist as swiftly as possible is important because it allows the author to see the details that make up the novel from the character's point of view. The wise and thoughtful, and in Schiller's usage, sentimental. You know, I also delivered another set of lectures and put them in a book together called The Naive and Sentimental Novelist, alluding to Schiller's famous book about poetry. The wise and thoughtful writer doesn't need their protagonist to whisper hints in their ear about the story or the plot or show them which direction to head in. But characters play a vital role in allowing us to see every scene and everything we will set out to describe through their eyes, from the first detail that draws us into writing the novel onto all the further leaves and details that follow. Whether the characters we create carry the story forward and whisper directives at the author, or take on more self-effacing role of helping the author see things in a realistic way, as in real life actually, and through the protagonist's perspective, ensuring a single coherent point of view, we will find in both scripts, in both scenarios, which we have sought here to carefully prize apart, that the author's principal mental effort, that is, when I'm writing a novel, that my principal mental struggle as they put pen to paper is to try and put themselves in their fictional protagonist shoes. That is, I say to myself as I walk, what would my character would have done at this situation? And the art of the novel is based on this. But I will tell you more, the more you do, you become the character. But I'm slowly unfolding the psychology of the writer. So far in these lectures, I have maintained that the process of writing a novel does not begin with the creation of a character, and now I'm suggesting that one of the fundamental features of creative writing is the exercise of our imagination in order to look at the world through the hero's eyes. Yet, although these two positions may seem contradictory, that is not the case. Don't forget that we ourselves create the characters, or the devices, as I have always been calling them, that we need in order to better observe the landscape we wish to see. We are already prepared to see the world through our characters' perspectives, but observing the world through a character's eyes still requires a certain imaginative effort. If we set aside plot, composition, the order and arrangement of chapters and moods, and questions of language and style, much of the creative energy we writers expend on writing a novel goes into trying to identify with the characters we have invented. At times we find ourselves wondering who this character is, who looks at the world in such a peculiar way and is prompting us to write these sentences that are pouring out of our soul, our pen, and our subconscious. Sometimes I feel I'm writing something, I don't know why I'm writing, but I know these structures, I have experienced so much, I know now I'm writing in the mood of a character. I am now, when I do that, know that I'm close to the spirit of the character, or I identified with the character so much that I am writing as almost a poetic, as if I am possessed by some power outside of me. Understanding a novelist's creativity means understanding their relationship with the characters they have created. As we begin to transition from the subject of the character to the question of creativity in the novel, I will take a brief detour. The author of those early novels we now consider classics, such as highly satirical Dickens, the dramatical Balzac, and the concise but precise Flaubert, were more than aware of the importance of the character in the novel. That, I think, is why they all did something that contemporary novelists, myself included, usually take great care to avoid. Not we, us, when I say we, us, modern contemporary novelists rarely do something they did so frequently. I'm telling you what that is. Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, Balzac, Flaubert, Dickens describe each character's appearance at great length, their faces, their hair, their build, their gestures, their eyebrows, and their noses. They were as earnest in this endeavor as they were enumerating those same characters' basic personality traits, for just like their readers, they too believed to some extent in the existence of a link between a character's physical appearance and their personal interior qualities. In my view, these are two reasons why contemporary novelists ascribe so much less significance They don't care about this. I don't care about the looks of a character, to their protagonist's physical appearance, unless a particular character's beauty, handsomeness, or excessive weight plays some kind of crucial dramatical function. Remember, please, the novel form was invented before the widespread use of photography. Photography was discovered in the 1840s, but only popularized cheap photography was possible in the early 20th century. Before photographs became commonly available, one of the most prominent disciplines within the visual art was portraiture. Europeans were accustomed to drawing connections between a character and their appearance. That was the craft of the painter, not just in portraits and painting made of lines and color, but also in literary descriptions made out of words. Whenever they introduce a character for the first time, 19th century novelists felt the need to say a few words about their personality and their face. Compared to the following centuries' writers, 19th century novelists enjoyed meddling with their readers' imagination, interfering with how their novel ought to be read and how it should be pictured in the reader's mind. Another 19th century custom was to serialize feuilletons, serialize the novels in newspapers alongside illustrations designed to capture the reader's attention. We know, for example, that Tolstoy, who was a very visual writer, reviewed some of the preliminary sketches, including a portrait of his famous Pr in War and Peace, that the famous artist Bachelot had made for an illustrated edition of War and Peace, suggesting some modifications. By instruction, the painter add one or two furrows to his forehead to show that he is interested in philosophy, Tolstoy would write to the illustrator. When we imagine Tolstoy and other novelists coming up with suggestions for the artists illustrating their books, we must ask ourselves whether they are referring to the text they have written or whether they are actually envisioning the character in their mind's eyes, or even memory. Now that they have written the text, they may have even faded memories of the character in the text or the character in their mind, or what they remember of him or her. For sometimes the face and even the personality of a character as they exist in the author's imagination will not quite match what is described in the text. I know from my own experience as a reader that even when the novel I'm reading reveals nothing about the facial features and overall appearance of the main character, I will come up with a face and a figure, though never clothes, never outfit, to ascribe to them. This is similar to what we sometimes do in day-to-day life, when our imagination automatically comes up with a face to match up to a person we've heard about but don't actually know and have never met. Descriptions of characters' faces in 19th century novel all tended to be alike. In the 20th century Turkish novel, they become as cliched as they had been in Ottoman divan poetry. In fact, these kinds of formulaic descriptions provide less insight into characters' personalities than they do into authors' skills and creative abilities, authors' crafts, I would say. I enjoy reading landscape descriptions in novels and picturing the scene in my mind, but when it is faces being described, whether it's Tolstoy or Flaubert, I have neither the ability nor the will to visualize the face. I wonder what you do. When I encounter a character whose face has not been described, on the other hand, I'll come up with the image myself. I invent a face, perhaps the face of someone I know, but the faces of fictional characters are always more vague than those of the people we see in real life. During the first 20 years of my career as a novelist, I did not want any photographs on the covers of my books that might be construed as portraying any of the characters therein, especially not the main character. I did not want any pictures, photos on the covers of my books, I mean. But later on, I changed my mind, partly because I knew from my own reaction to other people's books that the reader might not like the cover image with the main character's face anyway, and will instead dream up some other face to replace it, one more attuned to their own taste and imagination. In fact, for the American edition of As Strangers in My Mind, one of my novels, my 9th novel, I followed the renowned cover designer Chip Kidd's suggestion, and I myself drew a portrait of the hero Mevlut, as teenager carrying jugs of yogurt on a pole across his shoulders. If I'm reading a new translation or a new edition of a novel I already know and love, such as Anna Karenina, say, and the protagonist's face happens to be on the cover, a new photo or whatever, picture of Anna Karenina, I don't really mind if this new face doesn't resemble the character as I had pictured them. If the cover doesn't harmonious with my idea of Anna Karenina, I don't care much, even it's an entirely contradictory image. All I'm interested in is whether the new translation is any good. But if I'm reading a new novel whose topic I'm not familiar with by an author whose work I've never read before, the protagonist's face as depicted on the cover could easily mislead me and create a false impression. These are strange curiosities of reading and writing books, and in fact, publishing books, but our idea of a character are closely linked to these. The kind of physical features that we might describe as emblematic and that were considered both in primary and secondary characters to point to various aspects of their personality eventually came to be used by certain authors, starting with Dickens, as a way of reducing some of the minor characters within their densely populated novels into a repeatedly mentioned feature of their physical appearance, such as a bulbous nose or a toothbrush mustache. When I reflect on the way the novel, since the start of the 20th century, has successfully marginalized all other types of literature and transformed into a truly literary global form, here I'm stressing that most of humanity do, as literature is reading and writing novels, I am not just thinking of how every nation on earth has been reading and writing novels, but also of how the kinds of literary conventions that I have just described have been learned from European novelists and been adapted by writers from all over the world, of course, also with their local contributions and writing in every language. I would love to have a dictionary of all these little gestures, little traits, influences. While we are on the subject of the globalization of the novel, let me share an example of this global universal urge to visualize a novel's characters in one's imagination. In 2021, the director of the Balzac Museum in Paris told me that the museum received a great many Chinese visitors. As you might guess, this is because Karl Marx enjoyed and wrote about Balzac's work, and so the Chinese state had encouraged the whole nation to read and appreciate the Balzac oeuvre. The museum director also told me that Chinese visitors who rushed straight to Balzac Museum upon their arrival in Paris were most curious about Eugénie Grandet's appearance. It seemed the most popular room in the museum was the one displaying the engravings, the black engravings that illustrated Balzac's novels. and the Chinese were very much interested in that. A visual author like me will understandably wonder, when looking at these engravings, which illustrations Balzac had seen and approved himself. But now, let's move on now from the character to the question of creativity and control. Subjects like inspiration and creativity, which can acquire such mysterious and inflated dimensions in our imagination, point to the artistic side of the novelist's endeavor. Yet, when I'm writing a novel, I don't necessarily feel as if my efforts were particularly artistic. More often than not, I feel like a medieval craftsman displaying qualities like discipline, patience, logic, and skill. Novelists' craftsman-like approach, their skill, their patience, and their discipline lay the groundwork for their artistic efforts. As we approach the closing minutes of our final lesson, I would like to lean on half a century's worth of personal experience to say a few words about creativity and control. I am drawing now from my own first-hand knowledge. I have been writing novels for 50 years, I'm sorry to repeat. I still, quote, forget myself. I still feel euphoric when I write, like a child playing with his toys. And if I happen to spend a few weeks without working on a novel, I inevitably fall into a state of creeping sorrow, melancholy, depression, whatever you might want to call it. So I ask myself sometimes what it is about writing novels that brings me so much joy and encourages me to persevere with such enduring enthusiasm. So that we don't end up confusing creativity with other pleasures, let me first summarize those other sources of joy inherent in being a novelist, which fall outside the scope of our subject matter, starting with the least important them all. One, these I'll just talk about and then ignore. As an author, having your books read and enjoyed not just in Turkish but all over the world, reaching tens of millions of the readers and seeing your words translated into 65 languages gives me a feeling of success. It is partly this success that keeps me going. Hemingway once said that too little and too much success will both be bad for a writer. In my first 10 years as a novelist, I couldn't even get my books published in Turkey. I was close to finishing my third novel when, after many trials and tribulations, I was finally published my first book. This means that for 10 years, I effectively wrote without any kind of wider recognition. I am sure that if success and recognition had continued to elude me, no one had published me, and after those first 10 years, I would not have been able to continue writing with such commitment in the 40 years that followed. Two, between the ages of 12 and 20, I was convinced that I was going to become a painter. Towards the end of my high school years and after I began studying architecture at university, I spent a significant amount of my time in a studio, shut away in a quiet room, making paintings. Working with pen and paper and a paintbrush prepared me for a life spent sitting in a room by myself. For 50 years, I had lived inside a little room in willing, industrious solitude. I was only 18 when I realized that I did not want to spend my life giving or taking orders, so this solitude has brought me great contentment. 3, I have always reacted to the society, the nation, the world I'm part of. I have never been a passive consumer or a mere bystander. I responded to events by writing. Rightly or wrongly, my fame as a novelist soon allowed my political views to reach a wider audience. Even Even though it has frequently got me into trouble and caused my novels to be misunderstood, I am still glad I have been political. Very glad indeed, I have to stress that I find myself making political comments both in and outside of my novels. And the fourth, I have cherished the opportunity to express myself, for it has allowed me to assert my individuality, to be different, to fulfill my potential. The subject of one of my novels, Black Book, which some consider, especially in Turkey, to be my most important novel, is the difficulty of being yourself. Despite all kinds of societal pressures, I have managed to be myself by writing novels. This may be an illusion, but it is certainly a joyous one. 5, I have lived a life full of creativity, or at least that is the conviction, perhaps the illusion I have lived by. I don't think there is any greater joy in life than this feeling. So, in a tongue-in-cheek, ironical way, I would sincerely advise everyone to become a novelist. Now, at the risk of repeating myself, I'm bearing in mind the condition I have termed the paradoxe of the novelist. Let me speak of those key moments when the novelist behaves more like an artist than as a craftsman. I have talked about being a craftsman. Now I'm going to talk about those areas where novelists elevate their craft into a kind of art. I will now this time say ABC. A, the use of style, language, and rhetoric. In these lectures, I've explained how a novelist's landscape forms its characters, the most plastic, playful, malleable substance that connects a novelist's protagonist to those aspects of the landscape we want to focus on is the language, the style, the lexicon, choice of words the author chooses to use. Authors discover their style by building language and using it to get closer to their landscape. In that moment, the landscape and the characters end up merging with the language that shapes them, just as the author merges with the characters they have created. Throughout this process, the author must not only follow inspiration, just as a poet would, but also be able to act rationally and control themselves as an editor would. But the subject of how style and language can be used to forge a character out of a novel's landscape is perhaps beyond the scope of these lectures. B, a whole host of other factors which turn the novelist's work into a creative endeavor concern what I will call the novelist's structure, the ordering of themes, the way the narrators and perspectives are arranged, jumping from one narrator to another, the choice of narrative techniques, and the sequence of chapters according to the emotions evoked by the text are all fundamental structural concerns. In this context, it is crucial for the author to be aware of other authors' techniques. In the early 20th century, the notion of time or of playing with time provided creative novelists with the opportunity to showcase their talent, their ingenuity. The story of a novel and its plot begin to diverge. It turned out it could be more interesting to start telling a story from somewhere in the middle or even from the end rather than from the beginning and in chronological order. We have talked about the difference between plot and the story. The narrative voice could skip to the future or go back in time, and this back and forth could be used to heighten the dramatical impact of the story, to delay the ending, to kindle curiosity or elicit other kinds of emotions. These time jumps in the story could be achieved through the narrative voice or equally through characters' reminiscences. Joseph Conrad taught me how to travel in time. William Faulkner placed the sense of time at the core of the novel, formed by alternating different perspectives and his narrative's recollections. Marcel Proust was the master of alluding to multiple moments in time within the same sentence. And as we can tell from the opening sentence of 100 Years of Solitude, one of the novelist's most adept at suddenly referring at any point in his story to events set to occur in a distant future was Gabriel Garcia Marquez, practicing the art of what Gérard Genel called prolepsis. Armed with all this knowledge, it is crucial for novelists to temper their bursts of inspiration with a reasoned attempt to control what is excessive and superfluous. C. Once the novelist has discovered the leaves on the novel's tree, its landscape, and the story and the characters that will ferry us towards this abundance, they also have the opportunity to exercise their creativity through dialogue. The kind of creativity the novelist wields when writing dialogue is similar to the playwright or the screenwriter's creativity. Some writers, such as Dostoevsky, found dialogue to be the supreme expression of their creative powers. Others, such as Proust, achieved surprisingly intricate effects by avoiding their characters' conversations altogether, especially in the early volumes of his great novel, where his style is more distinct and Proustian. Dialogue within a novel, whether it is taking place in the present or in the past, gives the reader the feeling that the story is flowing forward in the moment and that they are right there, the reader, witnessing events as they happen. D. Novelists have to be at their most creative when putting themselves in their inventive protagonist's shoes. At every juncture of the plot, the writer must put themselves in their character's position and predict what decisions their characters will take, what they will do, what they will think, what they will say. I'm here repeating myself. What would I do? What would I do in that situation? This question, which usually points to some kind of moral dilemma, is one that novelists must ask themselves, most of all when they think of their characters independently of any ethical considerations. But the final transformation of the novelist into an artist comes when they are able to leave behind the above-mentioned I. At that point, the author is closer than ever to the fictional protagonist's self and soul and starts truly seeing the world through his or her character's eyes. As I compose a scene in the first or third person singular, I lovingly ponder when to start describing the view of the Bosphorus from the window and a passing ship, the coffee cup on the tray on the table, the light filtering inside, the mindless comment made by an unimportant character, the seagull perch on the chimney across the road. I feel most like a creative artist in those moments when I am working on some dramatical passage that I had previously only sketched out, deciding whether the narrator should pay attention to the silence inside the room, or squeaking wheels of the tramway passing by outside, the color of a chocolate wrapper, a loose button falling into the carpet, the relatively inconsequential smell of mildew wafting towards the protagonist's nose. Everything in that moment is possible, and you can put that in a novel, and it will be an extension of the drama And the novelist feels most artistic when he or she is making these decisions. The art of the novel consists in the writing observing the world through the perspective of fictional characters, whether or not they resemble the writer. The urge to pick up a novel we haven't read before is rooted in the wish to look out at the world through another mind, another pair of eyes, another window. I have already talked about this desire in my first lecture, second lecture. Novelists are aware of this, which is why they seek at once to emphasize their separation from their characters and to imply that they themselves have some experience of the story they are telling. The art of the novel rests on the author's ability to write about themselves as if they were writing about someone else, and to write about others as if they were writing about themselves. I'll reread this. The art of the novel rests on the author's ability to write about themselves as if they were writing about someone else, and to write about others as if they were writing about themselves. Where the author is most comfortable identifying with the characters they have created, the distance between the author and the character narrows even further, creating a kind of spiritual bond. Pretty soon, the author makes a habit of looking at the world through the eyes of the character they have identified with. The ideal creative moment arises when the novelist identifies automatically and without too much effort with the character they have created, and little like someone driving a car without thinking consciously about where they are putting their hands and feet, whether they're changing gears or not. In this moment of cohesion, the condition which I have termed the paradoxe of the novelist, that is to say, the contradiction between envisaging a novel as a picture and imagining it as an idea, fades into background. The novelist no longer wishes to be separate from the protagonist or his character. They have become one. Here is an example. My novel, My Name is Red, is a historical novel I wrote in the first person singular and through the perspective of various different characters, like William Faulkner's As I Lay Dying or The Sound and the Fury. After 10 days spent writing a long 12-page chapter, say chapter 34, which channels the voice of the female protagonist Shekure, I would not want to separate myself from the character I had so closely identified with. So I would skip writing to another chapter, say chapter 48, also narrated by Shekure in the first person singular. As I had already made a detailed outline of the story and taken copious notes in advance about who would say what in which chapter, I was well prepared to make this jump. I tend to spend more time than other writers, relatively speaking. I tend to spend more time than other writers do on establishing a story, making detailed plans, and thinking about narrator's plot well before I start writing a novel. My view is that spending as much time as possible thinking about the story before beginning to compose the first leaves that we have talked about in the first week, as later leaves and chapters will pave way when the time comes to actually write each individual sentence for the novelist's creativity to flourish, for poetry and inspiration to come to the fore. That, in summary, is why I like to plan and picture everything in advance before undertaking the kind of novelist work I have spoken of in these lectures. More or less, I'm saying, if you plan more, if you take outlines, if you decide about the character more and take notes and thoughts and you know what you're going to write in 48 chapter, that you can be more creative, more artistic, you feel more elevated in your craft and feel like an artist. It is possible that some writers are employing a similar novel writing strategy as the one my simultaneously craftsman and artistic approach has developed, but doing the same kind of planning and filling up notebooks and bits of paper with ever-changing notes and plans all inside their heads, that is to say, without actually writing none of it down. I wonder sometimes if that is how Stendhal wrote The Shutter House of Parma. You know, we were surprised. Tolstoy and Balzac was jealous that he wrote it in 42 days. Or perhaps he did take notes, but later destroyed them all. Some writers do this when they don't want the hidden seams of their novels to be visible, when they don't want anyone to know how they went about constructing their complex creations. They jealously guard their professional secrets and hide their imperfect drafts in order to preserve the mystery of their achievement. They imagine that this will imbue the beauty of their novels with a greater sense of magic, mystic, and mystery, while I'm claiming that I'm telling you everything. Some writers will purposely destroy their notes and their plans, burning them in a ritual pyre. Others lose or throw away their notes and notebooks out of genuine humility because they don't consider themselves important enough to do otherwise. It amazes me to think of how little value these kind of authors place on their personal memoirs, but I do understand that not everyone is a born collector. I am a born archivist, and I keep every paper I write on. In any case, whether a writer only makes notes in their minds or does, as I do, taking matters step by step, leaf by leaf, and always thinking sentimentally. Here, when I say sentimentally, I use the word sentimental in the meaning Friedrich Schiller intended, alluding to my earlier book on the art of the novel. Of the effects of their writing upon their writers, the limits of human memory and imagination mean that there is no way you can write a novel without going through the various steps we have discussed in these lectures. You may be self-conscious about them, or you may not be self-conscious. You may think that you are poetically inspired, but more or less limits of human imagination and thinking tells us reasonably to argue that that's how we compose and write novels. Thus, when we speak of mastering the art of the novel, we are less concerned with the author's creative brilliance than their ability to dedicate the requisite energy and attention to the steps and methods we have discussed throughout these lectures. Importantly, this attention should develop of its own accord with the novelists with whose naive poets Schiller wrote about, not being too aware of what they are doing, not thinking too much of these different processes, and writing as if the words were flowing from the tip of their pen, unbidden, a product of divine inspiration. Some novelists really believe this, and there is a truth in that, but it's impossible to do it without taking these steps. Once the novelist is able to reach this stage, perhaps because they are well-versed in their art or craft, or because they have imagined and rewritten each leaf and branch of the novel over and over again, or perhaps for some other mysterious reason, they will acquire a wholly unique perspective and experience the great pleasure of being able to see the world through characters' point of view and simultaneously through their own. When the novelist is able to do this, all the divergences, the discrepancies, the contradictions between the idea and the picture at the heart of the novel, between lived and imagined experience on one hand, between a single leaf and the whole of the tree, all seem instantly resolved. The paradox of the novelist, that endless source of difficulty and dejection, seems at once to fade into background, and the author begins to feel that they can write anything they want, that everything can fit into their novel, and that the whole world, as mirrored in their book, will come alive in brand new ways. It's a jubilant feeling, and I have been writing for 50 years so that I can feel that sense of euphoria again and again. I would like to thank Collège de France for this opportunity to explore the sources of creative joy and to share the craftsman-like experience I have accumulated in my 50 years as a writer. It has been also a great pleasure to talk to you looking at your faces. Now, William Marx will handle the situation, and we expect that you ask questions for a while. Yes, I hear.
Thank you, Orhan. And let us take some 10 minutes, perhaps, for a last ultimate series of questions. So, well, here's your chance, Cyril. So, des questions, donc en français, il y a monsieur là-bas. En français ou en anglais, pas de problème.
First of all, thank you very much for this lecture. I would like to ask you a question about inspiration and its continuity. I was researching the difficulties of young writers experience most, and I realized that the most common one is disability to continue and finalize the writing they already started. At some point, people lose their focus, motivation, or a lack of imagination just occurs. What would be your advice for those people? And did you experience such a difficulty in your career?
Maybe I'll answer from the second question. Of course, I experience all the difficulties all the young, old, middle-aged writers experience. But in fact, your question goes right to the heart of what I am trying to deliver in the last 4 weeks, that most of the difficulties I also saw around coming across young writers will be writers who are writing their first novels. I did not teach too much creative writing, but I know about the whole thing. I also have lots of young writer friends, autobiographies, biographies of writers, that the difficulty of focusing and continuing with the same intensity and lucidness, clearness, with the same vivid imagination is really about this, that, as I have said in my first lecture, let's imagine a novel as a tree with 10,000 leaves, and say some 100 branches and 1 trunk. That writer can continue to write if he or she takes notes about them, thinks about the story, chapters the story, piles of notes and notes and notes, and knows about what he or she is going to do. Characters don't take over, don't take the novel. That you have to foresee the tree, think about the leaves, Just don't start the novel with 1 or 2 trees and you think and those first leaves may look so beautiful, but then you cannot continue. And in disappointed novelists, this happens most of the time. And people think it's inspiration. I think it's not inspiration, but lack of planning. And fake belief, the illusion that inspiration will help. In fact, I argued that if you plan ahead, have a richer idea of the leaves, the branches, and the trunk, that is less likely that you will be struck, you will be disappointed if you're writing any novel. Whether it's your first or it's your 5th, it doesn't matter.
One more question, if I can.
Yes?
Okay. And how do you... Sorry?
No, sorry, please, a short one.
Okay.
Short.
And how do you decide when a novel is completed and ready to publish? I mean, when you maybe read your novel, do you feel, oh, I should rewrite this part or, change?
Everyone has a standard of his or her. I set out the storyline, and I make chapter the book before I start writing. If I think that the chapter is satisfactory, then all the chapters are okay, then the novel is finished. Yes?
The question here. Cyril. Non, c'est monsieur d'abord. Voilà. Non, monsieur ici. Voilà.
Merci beaucoup pour votre conférence, monsieur Pamuk. Juste une simple question, peut-être c'est un peu bête ou évident. Qu'est-ce que vous pensez du résultat de l'élection présidentielle en Turquie? Et qu'est-ce que vous pensez de la relation entre votre littérature et l'actualité en Turquie? Merci beaucoup.
Yeah, thank you very much for the very sophisticated question. I'll write these things in my novels, and I really care about my lectures. You may probably guess what I think about my reaction is, on the other hand, yes.
Okay. No, second question.
Yes, so first off, thank you for your lectures. Just had a simple question. What novel, aside from the ones that you've written, would best encapsulate everything you've told us since the last 4 sessions?
In the end, no, I am talking about a sort of a simplification of what I did, a sort of an over-category, simplified over with also exaggerated categories of what happens in my mind. These processes of writing the first 3, making notes, thinking, inventing the story, chaptering, checking, so forth, most of the time happens simultaneously in every novelist's mind. Whether a novel is a good or bad, whether a novel, this is how the novelist's mind works. My lectures, my talks are more about how the novelist behaves, how the novelist thinks, and what are the contradictions in his or her thinking, rather than the recipe for a good novel and what is the best novel. If you ask me the best novel, I also alluded that Anne Karenina, there are so many great novels. But I also try to sum up my way of thinking about what I've been doing in the last 50 years. Yes.
Il y avait une question là-haut, effectivement, monsieur. Qui est là-haut.
Oui, monsieur Pamuk, je suis très heureux de pouvoir vous poser cette question. Vous avez défini le romancier comme artisan, et je crois que c'est très important, dans le sens, comme artisan, tu vas mettre 1000 fois sur le métier. Et votre tissu comme artisan, ce sont les mots, les phrases. Vous avez en même temps parlé de l'intention du texte. C'est-à-dire que vous êtes un grand romancier, mais quelqu'un qui s'intéresse à l'écriture, qui écrit, même à un tout petit niveau, a fait cette expérience de commencer à écrire, puis tout d'un coup de voir qu'il va autre part. Alors, est-ce que vous pensez que c'est ce tissu qui le mène ailleurs? Ça, c'est ma première question. La deuxième question, c'est...
Très courte, s'il vous plaît.
Oui, c'est la relation entre les diverses formes de création. C'est-à-dire, vous avez parlé des 3 dimensions du roman. Ça m'a fait penser à la sculpture. Vous avez parlé de la musicalité dans l'écriture, notamment avec Mort à Venise et Mahler. Vous avez parlé de paysages. Vous avez parlé, dans vos romans, on trouve les artisans avec le vendeur de yaourt et ces deux grands plats. Alors, est-ce que vous pensez que dans le monde d'aujourd'hui, qui est mené par l'argent et la violence, le fait de pouvoir, à tous les niveaux, pouvoir créer quelque chose tout simplement, c'est-à-dire faire cette expérience d'aller au-delà, est-ce que c'est ce qu'on peut appeler la création?
Merci.
I understand. Maybe I'll give a brief answer to the second question. That I don't think that my generation or humanity is losing sense of poetry. I think humanity will, next generation will be as equally imaginative, creative, and poetic as we are, or perhaps as our ancestors are. I am not disillusioned with the progress of humanity. I may be disillusioned about politics or this or that, but human creativity is a constant thing that shines in my mind and also inspires me. I am not illusioned by the facts that there is more businessmen eagerness for money and human creativity is declining. And the second thing, writing taking me to something that I have not thought of before. Yes, this is when between the ages of 7 and 22, when I wanted to be a painter, I'll just draw color over the canvas and invent things as I painted. There is that side to it when you write a novel, but then this is more like experimental novel. What I mostly talk about are not inspirational creative exercises, but I talked about building a novel, like building a cathedral, word by word. And I'm saying, more or less, you have to make plans, you have to know what you're gonna do. Then yes, a time comes that the divine or artistic inspiration also helps you. It's an illusion. In fact, what you do, since this plan works and it seems beautiful and you're so happy that you feel elevated, and it's a good feeling that I've followed all through my life, but it is mostly based on preparing before, making preparations, then it comes more often. That is my advice. Plan ahead, then you will feel like an artist.
That will be a wonderful conclusion, but let us take the last question by a woman. So, this, voilà. Une question brève, s'il vous plaît. Voilà.
I have a rather strange question. I teach creative writing for people that are going to make animation movies, so I want to know your thoughts or your advice for those writers that are creating characters that someone is going to make, the appearance is going to convey their psychology.
Well, you know, Tolstoy believed in what you said, as I gave the example today, that 19th century, early 20th century writers believed that the appearance suggests the character. Well, okay, maybe clothes, this or that. A fat man may be, you know, socialist literature described capitalists as fat men, eager and smoking a cigar. but I think it's a cliche. The more the appearance suggests the character, the more a cliche is. But of course, art and also creative writing is also using cliches in a playful way. There is no limit to what I say. That I'm talking only about novelists and the art of writing novels, that my generation of writers, we do not believe in the suggestions of facial description implying a character. While you can have a capitalist smoking a fat capitalist smoking a cigar, but most of the time now they are skinnier, they are not fat, they are healthy than anyone else.
Thank you, Orhan Pamuk. Let me say a few words of thanks to Orhan Pamuk, just first for his generosity in answering all these questions. And remember, I started my introductory speech for the first lecture by saying I had a dream of having you, making lectures here. And I must say that my dream has been more than fulfilled by yourself.
I'm also very happy delivering these lectures and the attention of the audience here. I felt really I'm being listened carefully.
I would like also to thank the audience to have come so many of you and so many young people too. And I think Orhan Pamuk and myself have appreciated that, and we have no worry at all about the future of imagination when we see all these young people listening and trying to find their way through the art of the novel. And the last thing I wanted to say is the fact that very few writers or artists are able. Yes, this is very customary for Orhan. Very few artists or writers are able to talk about their art as clearly as Orhan Pamuk does. So Orhan Pamuk is able to do so and to bring new and clear insights on the way he practices, the writing of novels. And Paul Valéry too was able to do so. So I think there is a clear link between you and Paul Valéry in the awareness of the processes of your art. And I think that makes those lectures so much more legitimate, on this chair where Paul Valéry has been at the honor and has been somehow your predecessor here, writing and speaking about his own art. Thank you so much, Orhan Pamuk. And we're waiting for the book to come, summarizing all of these lectures, who will become these lectures, I'm sure, a landmark of literary criticism and for all future novelists and all readers and lovers of novels. Thank you.
Thank you very much.